Let me give you a real quick history lesson on the Gospels because this is slightly misinformed. First of all, the first time that Jesus was ever spoken about or written about whatsoever was not actually in the Gospels. It was through the writings of Paul's letters, 7 of which have been deemed to be authentically from Paul, and an additional 5 or 6 who were pseudepigraphal, who tried to write like Paul, to act like Paul, giving us 13 of the New Testament books attributed to Paul. And again, he wrote everything he wrote, but way before the Gospels were written. Now, the first Gospel, which was the Gospel of Mark, was actually written somewhere in the earliest dating around 90 CE, and the oldest copy that we actually have is from about 135 CE. A couple of years after Mark was written, a few more Gospels were written based off the book of Mark, which is Matthew, Luke, and John. Those are dated even later than the Gospel of Mark, meaning that they were written up to 100 years after Jesus Christ would have existed. But here's the big kick. Neither Paul's letters nor any of the Gospel writers were written by someone who actually physically met and knew Jesus. That's right. None of the Gospel writers actually knew Jesus. None of the disciples of Jesus actually wrote anything. And the names we have, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are names that were attributed to the books far after they were actually written. Now, since the first gospel, the Gospel of Mark, is very easily proven to be a copy of Homer and the Homeric epics that were written long, long before him, it definitely creates a trail by which all the other Gospels are also based on fiction, just like the first one, the Gospel of Mark. Couple that with the fact that there's no tangible evidence whatsoever for the existence of Jesus Christ, and you have a real dilemma on your hands. Especially since Jerusalem was considered one of the most literate cities on earth during the time of the first century when Jesus would have supposedly been walking around, since they were so adamant about teaching the reading and writing of Hebrew, since it's core to their religion. Since the people of Jerusalem were so literate, we actually have a lot of writings of the people of Jerusalem during the time that Jesus would have been around. And guess what? No one, not a single person from the time of Jesus' life wrote a single word about his existence in Jerusalem. Instead, all we get is fictional writings from Paul, who came 20 years after Jesus would have supposedly died. And Paul's version of Jesus was nothing like the gospel version of Jesus. In fact, he wasn't even a physical being. He was just a spiritual. The Gospels were the first attempt by early Christians to try and historicize Jesus and make him into a real human being, even though he never was.